It was late, probably past midnight by now, and I was still in the library. It wasn't the first time I'd stayed this late to work on an assignment. The library was the only place on campus where I could really focus. The silence there usually calmed me. Almost everyone had already left, and the only sound was the tapping of my laptop keys filling the empty space. But that night, something felt different. I can't quite explain it, but the silence felt heavier. Every page I turned in my notebook seemed to make more noise than usual. It's all in my head, I told myself. I was tired and stressed. I finished writing another sentence and looked around. The cold, white lights illuminated the shelves full of books, just like they always did. Nothing seemed out of place. And yet, for some reason, I felt a bit unsettled. I couldn't focus like before. Maybe it was the exhaustion or the fact that I was completely alone. Shaking my head, I went back to work, determined to finish what was left. After all, it was just another college assignment. What could go wrong? I was trying to focus, but I couldn't shake that unsettling feeling. That's when I heard it. A faint sound, barely noticeable, but it was there. It sounded like a dragging footstep, as if someone was slowly walking between the shelves. I stopped typing and listened, waiting to hear it again. But the silence returned, swallowing the space. It's just my imagination, I told myself. No one else stayed in the library this late except maybe the janitor. I took a deep breath and tried to get back to work, but my concentration had completely vanished. Then the sound came again. This time it was clearer, like it was a bit closer. I lifted my head, looking toward the shelves, expecting to see someone. Nothing. The discomfort began to intensify. Still, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe it was just the building making noises, or a breeze slipping through the windows. But as the minutes ticked by, I wasn't so sure anymore. I decided to take a quick look, just to reassure myself that everything was fine. I got up from my chair, careful not to make a sound, and started walking toward the shelves, not entirely sure what I was expecting to find. I reached the shelves, and of course there was no one there. I walked between the rows of books, listening for anything beyond my own footsteps, but the silence was absolute. Maybe I really was just too tired and starting to imagine things. I decided it was time to leave. I'd done enough work for the night, and I could review everything tomorrow with a clearer head. I headed back to my desk, closed my laptop, and packed everything into my bag. At that point, all I wanted was to leave and get back to my dorm. When I reached the library door, I turned the handle, but it didn't budge. I tried again, harder this time, but it was locked. I paused for a moment, confused. The door was never locked at this hour. I'd stayed late many times and had never had an issue before. I looked around, half expecting to see someone who could explain what was happening, but the library was just as empty as it had been. I tried the handle again, now with more urgency, but still nothing. Panic began to creep in, and I found myself glancing around, searching for an exit, as if I were trapped in a place I wasn't supposed to be. I needed to think. There were other exits in the library, so I started walking toward the back, heading for the emergency exit. My footsteps echoed more than I remembered, and what once felt like a peaceful quiet now gave me the unsettling sense that something was off. I quickened my pace, trying to stay calm. Maybe the security guard had locked the front door by mistake. That had to be it. But as I passed the rows of shelves, I heard that sound again. The same soft dragging noise, like someone slowly walking. But I knew no one was there. I picked up my pace, but the faster I walked, the closer those footsteps seemed to get. There was no logical explanation, and my mind started racing along with my feet. I weaved between shelves and tables, trying to ignore the sound, but it was there, constant, persistent. I reached the emergency exit and, with trembling hands, pushed the metal bar. Nothing happened. The door wouldn't open. Now I was really starting to worry. I stepped back, glanced behind me, and the library looked different. It felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing in tighter. I needed to hide, just until I could figure out what was happening. I hid between two shelves, pressing myself against the wall, trying my best not to make any noise. The sounds had stopped, but that didn't bring me any relief. If anything, the absolute silence now felt even more threatening. The library was eerily quiet, as if it were waiting for something. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to gather my thoughts. I need to get out of here. Suddenly, I heard a click. My eyes snapped open and I waited, not moving a muscle. I didn't know what it was, but it was a different sound, distant. I decided to peek between the books, and to my surprise, the main library door was slightly ajar. The click, it was the sound of the door unlocking by itself. For a moment, I was frozen. It didn't make sense, but that was my chance to escape. I bolted toward the door, focusing only on getting to the other side. I ran through the door and out into the brightly lit hallway. Relief washed over me, but something still felt off. I turned back for one last look. The library now seemed so normal, so harmless. But the feeling that something was wrong still clung to me. I never stayed late there again. You know that kind of silence you only find when everyone decides to leave? That's exactly how the dorm felt. Almost everyone had left for the long weekend, and I had decided to stay back and catch up on some studying. The peace was almost eerie, but at the same time it was welcome. The usually noisy campus now felt like a different place, as if it were in standby mode. The sun had been gone for a while, and the night was slowly taking over everything. I was sitting at my desk, flipping through some notes, enjoying the quiet to focus. The hallway lights slipped through the crack in the door and everything seemed in order. There was nothing to distract me, not even the usual hurried footsteps or distant voices. But then after a while I heard a sound. It was faint, like soft footsteps from the floor above. At first I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just the building settling or some noise from outside. I continued with my studies, but the sound persisted. Now I was a little more alert, though not really worried yet. The minutes passed and the sound from upstairs didn't fade. It was like someone was pacing back and forth, but very slowly, almost dragging their feet. In my head it didn't make much sense. As far as I knew, no one else had stayed in the dorm. Most people had left for the weekend, and the few who might have stayed were likely on the ground floor. But okay, maybe someone had changed their mind and decided to stay too. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. I tried to refocus on my notes, but the thought of someone walking around upstairs stuck with me. The sound was continuous but soft, almost like whoever it was didn't want to be heard, which only made it feel stranger. I got up from my chair, not in a rush, and went to the door. I opened it just a crack, enough to peek into the empty hallway. The lights were on, but no one was there. Go upstairs to check? I thought about it for a moment, but decided against it. I closed the door and went back to my desk. The sound stopped for a while and I thought the mystery was over. But I was wrong. I had barely sat down again when the sound returned, this time louder and more present. It no longer felt like just the building settling, nor something I could easily ignore. It was the same sound of footsteps, but now it was clearer, as if whoever, or whatever, was directly above me, not as distant as before. Whatever was happening upstairs wasn't just in my imagination. I tried to push away the discomfort, forcing myself to focus on my notes, but it was too late. Every time I tried to ignore it, the footsteps grew more distinct. They would stop for a moment, only to return, sounding like someone was dragging their feet across the floor. And to make things worse, another noise began to accompany the footsteps. It sounded like something heavy being dragged, maybe a chair or a table, scraping across the floor. My mind raced for explanations, but nothing made sense. Who could be doing this? And why? I stared up at the ceiling, hoping the sounds would stop, but they only grew louder, as if they were taunting me. It was clear I wouldn't be able to continue without going upstairs to see what was going on. There was no more ignoring it. I stood up, feeling the weight of my decision to go upstairs. The hallway looked just like before, empty and lit by those cold, white lights that now felt more unsettling than comforting. I climbed the stairs carefully, listening to each step I took, almost trying to match them with the sounds from above. When I reached the top, everything was so quiet it was hard to believe anyone was actually there. I walked through the corridors, glancing at the doors to the other rooms, all closed. There was no sign of anyone. I began to think it might have just been the building after all, until I noticed one door slightly ajar. That was strange because I was certain all the doors had been shut when I looked earlier. I approached slowly, my heart racing. With a gentle push, the door swung open fully. The room was empty as I expected, but something caught my attention. In the middle of the room, a chair was turned upside down, almost as if it had been placed there on purpose. Before I could even process what I was seeing, the sound returned. Only now it wasn't coming from upstairs, it was coming from downstairs. From my room. The sound coming from my room was now unmistakable, as if someone was inside. I didn't think twice. I raced down the stairs, each step feeling heavier as the noise from my room grew louder. When I finally reached the door, I tried to open it, but it was locked. That didn't make any sense. I hadn't locked it when I left. I pounded on the door, desperately twisting the handle, but nothing happened. Inside, the sounds continued. Slow footsteps and the faint dragging of something heavy across the floor. I was out of breath, throwing my body against the door, and finally, with a loud crack, it gave way. I practically fell into the room. To my surprise, everything was exactly as I had left it. The chair was still in place, the books scattered on the desk, the lamp glowing softly. There was no sign of anyone, and nothing seemed out of place. The sound had vanished the moment the door opened. I tried to calm myself, convincing myself that maybe I had overreacted. But as I lay down trying to relax, I could still hear it. Faint footsteps in the distance, far enough to make me question whether any of it had really happened or if I just needed some rest. It was late. After hours in the library trying to catch up on my studies, all I wanted was to crawl into bed and sleep. The campus was quiet, the kind of silence that only happens when almost everyone has already gone to bed. The walk back to the dorm was quick, but my mind was still buzzing with readings and approaching deadlines. When I got to my room, the first thing I noticed was the window. It was open. Strange, because I distinctly remembered closing it before I left. I had even looked at the cloudy sky outside, bracing myself for the cold that would come. And now there it was, wide open, with the curtains gently swaying in the breeze. I walked over to the window and carefully closed it. I made sure to lock it, double-checking that the latch was secure. It must have been the wind, I thought. I was too tired to consider any other explanation. All I wanted was to lie down and forget about the day. The room was just as I had left it. The bed was calling to me, and the quiet of the night seemed perfect for some rest. I turned off the light and lay down. All I wanted was to sleep. I had barely closed my eyes when I heard a sound. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. It sounded like a soft scratching coming from the window. For a moment, I thought it was just my imagination, or maybe the wind brushing against the trees outside. I ignored it. I lay still in bed, trying to convince myself it was nothing. I was tired, and sleep wouldn't come if I kept focusing on every little noise. But the sound persisted. Slow, rhythmic, like someone gently tapping on the glass. I shifted in bed, trying to find a comfortable position, but the quiet tapping wouldn't stop. I took a deep breath, opened my eyes, and lay there, staring at the ceiling. It's probably just the wind, I thought again, but I wasn't as sure this time. I decided to get up and check, just to calm my nerves. I walked over to the window and inspected it closely. The latch was still locked. I pulled the curtains aside and looked outside. Nothing. The campus was empty, illuminated only by the dim streetlights casting long shadows. Everything looked normal, except for the unease that was growing inside me. I closed the curtains and went back to bed, but sleep felt more distant than ever. I adjusted myself in bed again, pulled the covers up, and tried to relax. But the feeling that something was off wouldn't leave my mind. The sound was gone, but the room felt different. The silence, which had once invited rest, now seemed heavy in the air. It was almost unsettling. Maybe it was just exhaustion, but every small noise that I would usually ignore seemed amplified. I stared at the ceiling, unable to close my eyes. My room was safe, right? I had checked the window, locked everything. But for some reason, that open window from earlier kept replaying in my head. Why had it been open? I was sure I had closed it before heading to the library. I turned on my side, trying to push the thoughts away. It wasn't the first time I had forgotten something simple. Maybe that was all it was. But why did it bother me so much? A gust of wind, an open window, a silly sound. It all seemed like small, insignificant details that were stealing my peace, and I couldn't understand why. Minutes passed and I was still there, wide awake. The room, once cozy, now felt off. Every little detail, from the way the curtains hung to the occasional creak of the bed, seemed to scream at me. It's all fine, I kept telling myself, but it didn't help. I got up again, this time with more urgency, and headed straight for the window. I looked closer, inspecting every corner, every latch. It was shut tight, but the curtain seemed to move slightly. I sighed and went back to bed, still without answers. But something was unsettling me, and sleep was far away. I lay down again, but this time I was on high alert. It wasn't just the sound or the fact that the window had been open earlier. Something else was bothering me, something I couldn't explain. Exhaustion mixed with a strange tension I couldn't shake. Then I heard it again. This time louder and clearer. It wasn't the wind. It was a click, like the window latch was trying to come undone. My body froze for a moment. Such a simple sound, but in that moment, it felt deafening. I shot up, heart racing, and rushed to the window. When I looked closely, I saw that the latch had indeed come loose, even though I had checked it earlier. How was that possible? I was sure I had locked it properly. I tried to secure it again, but my hands were trembling slightly. The room felt suffocating now, each sound amplifying my anxiety. I slammed the window shut, pulled the latch as tightly as I could, and went back to bed. I felt vulnerable, but also ridiculous for being so worked up over something so simple. Still, I couldn't relax. Something wasn't right, and I didn't know what to do. I sat on the edge of the bed, now fully awake. The window was locked, the room was closed, but that strange feeling lingered, like something was out of place. I sat there, still, staring into the darkness, trying to force my mind to find some peace. But the sound of the window latch still echoed in my head, even though everything was silent now. I took a deep breath, lay down again, but I couldn't bring myself to turn off the light. The night felt longer than usual, and sleep was no longer an option. I just wanted it to be over, to feel normal again.